What if, one of the most famous quotes in human history has just been completely misunderstood for 2,000 years?
I mean, it is entirely possible and honestly highly likely when you look at the history.
Right, because for centuries, John 14.6, where Jesus says, I am the way and the truth and the life, it's basically been used as like the ultimate theological VIP bouncer.
Yeah, the guy at the door with the clipboard.
Exactly. The idea is simple,
Yeah.
If your name isn't on the list and if you don't have the exact right doctrinal credentials, you just aren't getting in.
You're left out in the cold.
Right. But what if we told you that the man who actually said those words wasn't talking about starting a new religion at all? Or like handing out exclusive tickets to the afterlife?
It changes everything about how we read the text today.
It really does. So today, in this deep dive, we are taking a stack of sources, specifically the historical and textual analysis in this really fascinating book called 151 Questions Christians Are Afraid to Ask.
Which is incredibly thorough, by the way.
It is, and we're using it to explore how this specific verse was interpreted to assert religious exclusivity and how it helped shift Christianity from a Jewish sect into a totally separate Western subculture. Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, to really get to the bottom of this, we have to look at how John 14.6 operates in the modern world first.
Right, the modern lens.
Exactly. Today, it is like the absolute bedrock of religious exclusivity. It introduces this hardline theological boundary, framing Jesus as the literal exclusive gatekeeper to God.
The VIP bouncer.
Right, your bouncer analogy. It implies that the only possible way to reach the Father is by becoming a Christian and, believing in his death on the cross.
So it demands this strict doctrinal purity. But hold on, I have to push back right out of the gate here.
Go for it.
You're saying we've misunderstood this, right? That it's like people have treated this verse as an exclusive VIP bouncer at the door of heaven. But what was the actual conversation happening in the room?
That is the million-dollar question.
Right, because was he even talking about the afterlife in that way? If he was just pointing people to Jewish law? Why is the phrasing so absolute? No one comes to the Father except through me. That sounds pretty exclusive.
Well, it definitely sounds that way to our modern Western ears. But we have to put ourselves in the actual room where this happened in the first century.
Okay, set the scene for us.
So, according to the sources, Jesus is having this intimate conversation with his Jewish disciples. He mentions that he's departing to his Father's house, which is John 14.2.
Right.
And then his disciple Thomas asks a very practical question. He basically says, how can we know the way to get there?
So Thomas is essentially just asking for walking directions.
Precisely. And Jesus' response, when you look at it in its first century Jewish context, is completely different from how we read it today.
How so?
Well, the way was actually a well-known idiom. In Jewish thought, following the way of God was totally synonymous with following the Torah. Yeah. Jesus is operating as a rabbi here. He is not presenting like a gospel message of salvation through faith in his future death. He's actually pointing his disciples back to the Torah.
Wait, really? So it's not about the cross at all?
Not in this context, no. He is emphasizing walking the narrow way, the righteous path of living according to God's law.
So it's less about him being this magic portal to heaven and more about him saying, look at how I live. I am the model for the law.
Exactly. The key takeaway from the textual analysis is that John 14.6 doesn't present salvation through faith in a crucifixion. Following the Torah is synonymous with following the way of God.
Okay, but still, what about the except through me part? That still trips me up.
Think of it like a master craftsman teaching an apprentice.
Okay.
If the master says, the only way you'll master this craft is through me, he's not saying his physical body is the craft itself.
Right, he's saying you have to follow his method.
Exactly. He's saying my instruction, my example is the only way you'll get this right. Jesus was emphasizing righteous living. The idea that he's a bridge to God through a crucifixion is, well, a much later theological extrapolation.
That makes so much more sense. But it raises a massive question. If the way originally meant living out the Torah, how did the earliest followers practice this? And when did they lose that connection?
Well, the historical reality is pretty stark. If you look at the book of Acts, specifically chapters 9 and 24, the earliest followers of Jesus weren't even called Christians.
Right, they were a Jewish sect, literally named the Way.
Yes, and they worshipped at the temple, they followed Jewish law, they kept the Sabbath. Jesus himself even stated in Matthew 1.21 that his mission was for his people, meaning the Jews.
Here's where it gets really interesting, Because the jump from a deeply Eastern Jewish movement observing the Torah to, a Western subculture that views Judaism as a completely separate religion is massive.
It's a colossal shift.
Yeah, how did that happen? And how did they justify it?
It comes down to demographics and a concept called supersessionism. As the movement spread to Gentiles, largely propelled by Paul and later church fathers, things changed rapidly.
Because suddenly you have all these Greek and Roman people who don't know anything about the Torah.
Exactly. From the 1st to the 5th centuries, as it became overwhelmingly Gentile, the church aggressively distanced itself from its Hebrew roots.
And that's where supersessionism comes in.
Yes, also known as replacement theology. Leaders like Ignatius of Antioch actually warned believers against living according to Judaism.
Wow, so he explicitly told them to stop.
He claimed the Torah was abolished. They argued that the church became the true Israel and that God had literally canceled his covenant with the physical descendants of Abraham.
That is just wild. So within a couple of generations, Jesus says he is the way, meaning the Torah, and then church leaders say following the Torah is spiritual death.
A complete reversal.
But to understand how the church justified this massive Hellenistic shift away from the Torah, we have to look at the very book where John 14:6 is found.
We do, and this is crucial. The Gospel of John is a radically different book compared to Matthew, Mark, and Luke.
We're talking a massive genre shift here.
Oh, absolutely. The sources point out that John contains no nativity story. It contains no parables.
No parables at all.
None. Instead, it focuses heavily on these cosmic Greek concepts. For example, it introduces Jesus as the Logos, which means the Word.
Right, the Logos, which is like a deeply established concept in Greek philosophy, right?
Exactly. It represented the divine ordering reason of the universe. John takes this Greek philosophical concept and applies it directly to a Jewish rabbi.
It's brilliant marketing for a Roman audience, honestly.
Yeah.
But John also alters historical timelines to fit this new theology, doesn't he?
Yes, he does. Matthew, Mark, and Luke place Jesus' death on the 15th of Nisan, which is the day after the Passover meal.
But John moves it,
John moves it to the 14th of Nisan.
which is the exact time the Passover lambs were being slaughtered in the temple.
Precisely. He shapes his timeline to portray Jesus as the literal Passover lamb. It's a profound theological statement, but it creates a massive chronological contradiction.
Okay, so if the Gospel of John is so radically different, full of Greek philosophy and changing timelines, did the early mainstream Christians even accept it right away, or were they suspicious?
They were highly suspicious. In fact, mainstream Christians initially didn't know what to do with John.
Because it felt too foreign.
Exactly. But you know who did love it?
Well,
The 2nd century Gnostics.
wait, the Gnostics? Like the mystical heretics?
The very same. Groups led by people like Valentinus and Basilides actually claimed John's Gospel as their own textbook.
You're kidding.
No, they used it for secret mystical knowledge gnosis. They wrote the very first commentaries on the Gospel of John.
So this foundational Christian text was basically a hit manual for a fringe mystical cult first.
What's fascinating here is that there was even a mainstream faction called the Alogai who explicitly rejected John.
A logi meaning like anti-logos.
Yes, they claimed it was heretical and refused to use it.
So how did it survive and become part of the Bible?
It wasn't until around 180 CE that a leader named Irenaeus of Lyons officially reclaimed John for the mainstream Orthodox Church.
He had to rescue it from the Gnostics.
He really did. He used the verse, "The Word became flesh," to anchor it in orthodoxy, since Gnostics hated the idea of physical flesh.
Okay, so once John's gospel was firmly established and totally stripped of its original Jewish context, verses like 14.6 were basically weaponized.
Weaponized is the right word. They used it to build a completely new theological framework of divine exclusivity.
Because if Jesus is this cosmic logos and the only way, it becomes about strict intellectual belief, not about how you live your life.
Exactly. Dogma replaces action.
But wait, let's look at the words Jesus never said. Despite all our modern assumptions, Jesus never actually said, "I am God," right?
He didn't. He never said, "I am God" or "I am the Christ." He used titles like the Door, the Good Shepherd, and the Light of the World.
And if you look at Mark 12:2-9, he explicitly affirms the Jewish Shema. He says, the Lord is one, and agrees that God is a distinct he, totally separate from himself.
Yes, and even on the cross, he cries out, my God," showing a distinct separation. He's praying to someone else.
So what does this all mean for the listener? I mean, how did the modern doctrine actually come to be if it isn't even in the Bible?
Well, the evolution of the Trinity took centuries. It started with something called Binitarianism in the 2nd century.
Binitarianism, so just two.
Right, God and Jesus, but Jesus was subordinate. Then, by 325 CE, you have the Council of Nicaea.
Right, where things got really political.
Very political. They were fighting a group called the Arians who believed Jesus was a created being. So the Nicene Creed introduced a Greek concept called homoousios.
Meaning same substance, right?
Exactly. It was a Greek philosophical term used to declare Jesus was of the exact same substance as the Father. It wasn't biblical, it was Greek.
And that still wasn't the Trinity we know today.
No, it wasn't until the 6th century in the Athanasian Creed that the modern Trinity One God in 3 co-equal persons was fully codified.
So John 14.6 had been completely repurposed. It went from an instruction about living righteously by the Torah to a demand for intellectual belief in these newly minted Greek-influenced creeds.
Yes, you had to believe the exact right Greek philosophy to be saved.
That is just an incredible journey. Let me just summarize this for you because it's massive. A single verse, John 14.6, spoken by a Jewish teacher, pointing his followers to the righteous path of the Torah, was totally reinterpreted by a Hellenized church.
Stripped of its original context entirely.
Right. It was transformed into a theological gatekeeper, fueling the evolution of the Way into this Western subculture that distanced itself from its Eastern Jewish origins.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it just reminds you that translations and historical agendas can entirely rewrite the foundation of a belief system.
It really does. So we want to leave you with a final lingering question to ponder on your own. If John 14.6 was truly just an instruction to walk the path of the Torah and not a declaration of exclusive divine access, what would the world look like today if the early church had simply remained a Jewish sect called the Way?
It's a huge what if.
What if they never built a global Western empire of exclusive doctrine?
It changes how you view all of history.